Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Mohiran Twadin Majid. I'm from the second group. So here I would like to tell you about the material observation. So observational data are attractive as they afford the researcher the opportunity to gather live data from live situation. So, observations means the researcher is given the opportunity to look at what is taking place in situation. This enables researchers to understand the context of programs or to be open-ended and inductive or to see things that might otherwise be unconsciously missed or to discover things that participants might not freely talk about in interview situation or to move beyond perception based data and to access personal knowledge. Argued by Morrison in 1993, observation is enable to the research to gather data on the first one is physical setting. The second one is human setting. The third one is interactional setting. The last one is program setting. So, the next material is structured observation. A structured observation is very systematic and enable the researchers to generate numerical data from the observations. Numerical data in turn facilitate the making of comparison between settings, situation, frequencies, pattern, and trends to be noted or calculated. The observer adopt a passive, non-intrusive role, merely noting down the incidence of the factor being studied. Observations are entered on an observational schedule. So this is the example of schedule used to monitor students and teacher conversation over a 10 minutes period. You can see the table in the PowerPoint. The upper 7 categories indicate who is speaking to whom, while the lower 4 categories indicate the nature of talk. So the next is event sampling. Event sampling, also known as a sign system, requires a tally mark to be entered against each statement each time it is observed. For example, you can see the table on PowerPoint. In this table, a tally mark or highest point teacher shot at the child. The researcher will need to devise statements that yield the data that answer the research question. This method is useful for finding out the frequencies or incidence of observed situation or behaviors. So that comparison can be made. We can tell the teacher does most sorting and the parent sorting at least for all. So the next is instantaneous sampling. If it is important to know the chronology of the events, then it is necessary to use instantaneous sampling, sometimes called time sampling. Here, the researchers enters what she observed at standard intervals of time. For example, every 20 seconds, every minute. On the stroke of that interval, she notes what is happening at that precise moment and enters it into the appropriate categories of the schedule. You can see the example of the table here in the PowerPoint. In this scene, the researchers notes down what is happening on the 30-second point and notice from this precise moment that the teacher initiates the smiling, but that all parties seems to be doing quite a lot of smiling. With that parent and the child doing the same amount of smiling each. Instantaneous sampling involves recording what is happening on the instant and entering it on the appropriate category. The chronology of events is thus preserved. So the next material is interval recording. Interval recording, this method charts the chronology of events to some extent and, like instantaneous sampling, requires the data to be entered in the appropriate category at fixed intervals. However, instead of charting what is happening on the instant, it charts what has happened during the preceding intervals. So, for example, if recording were to place every 30 seconds, then the researchers would note down in the appropriate category what had happened during the preceding 30 seconds. Whilst this enables frequencies to be calculated, simple patterns to be observed, and an approximate sequence of events to be noted, because it charts what has taken place in the preceding interval of times. Some elements of the chronology might be lost. For example, if 3 events took place in the preceding 30 seconds of the example, then the order of 3 events would be lost. We would know simply that they had occurred.
The last of principal ways of entering data into a structured observation is rating scale. Rating scale. In this method, the researcher is asked to make some judgment about the events being observed and to enter responses into a rating scale. What is rating scales? A rating scale is typically used in quantitative and qualitative observation methods. A rating scale is a method of data collection that is used to gather comparative information about a specific research. When we are carrying out a systematic investigation or observation, the researcher may need the respondents to rate his or her knowledge or degree of satisfaction with a particular product or service. With a rating scale, the researcher can easily quantify respondents' knowledge or an opinion in terms of specified values, which can be numerical or otherwise. This is the example of a rating scale. There is a pain scale, the degree of a pain scale from the no pain into a worst pain possible. So there is a degree from the lower into higher scale. Next is critical incidents. Critical incidents, Flanagan, 1949, and critical events, Reich, 1994, are particular events or occurrences that might typify or illuminate very starkly a particular feature of a teacher's behavior or teaching style. A critical incident is a research method in which the research participant is asked to recall and describe a time when a behavior, action, or occurrence impacted or either positively or negatively a specified outcome. Developed by John Flanagan, this method is defined as a set of procedures designed to collect observation of human behaviors from simplifying. When the critical incident technique is used in observation or research, Each participant could contribute many incidents. It is quite possible that hundreds of incidents are collected through numerous interviews. Next is naturalistic observation. Naturalistic observation is an observational method that involves observing peoples in the environment in which it typically occurs. Naturalistic observation is a research method in which people or other subjects are observed in their natural setting. Naturalistic observation is different than structured observation because it involves looking at subjects' behavior. It occurs in a natural setting with no attempts at intervention on the part of researcher. Naturalistic observation involves observing subjects of interest in their normal, everyday setting. It is sometimes referred to as field work because it requires researchers to go out into the field or the natural setting to collect data on their participants. And the last is ethical consideration. The ethical dilemmas are numerous, charting the tension between innovation and protection of privacy and the public's legitimate right to know, between informed consent and its violation in the interest of a wider public, between observation as a superficial, perhaps titillating spectator sport and as important social research. In conducting a researcher cannot be free to do anything. But in conducting a researcher must also take care of his allow and not allow in conducting a research. So, ethical considerations are limitations for a researcher in conducting his research about what he can and cannot do in conducting his research. Because sometimes, in conducting research, the public still has privacy that we can intervene to seek answer for our research.
This is the part of the test. Do you know about the test? Okay, the test is the one of the most important things in the data collecting. Test and testing have a long and venerable history, since the spelling test of Rice, the fatigue test of Ebbinghaus, and the intelligence scale of Binet. The group of tests has proceeded at an extraordinary pace in the terms of volume, variety, scope, and sophistication. Okay, in the test, researchers have at their disposal a powerful method of data collection and impressive array of tests for gathering data of numerical rather than verbal kind. The next is parametrics and non-parametrics test. Parametric tests will usually be published as standardized tests which are commercially available and which have been piloted on a large and representative sample of the whole populations. And the next is non-parametric. The attraction of non-parametric statistics is their utility for small samples because they do not make any assumption about how normal, even, and regular the distributions of scores will be. Furthermore, computation of statistics for non-parametric tests is less complicated than that for parametric tests. Okay, so parametric tests are more powerful than non-parametric tests because they not only derive from standardized score, but enable the researcher to compare subpopulation with one school with whole population. For example, to compare the results of one school one school or local education authority with the whole country, for instance in comparing students' performance in norm reference or criterion reference test against a national average score in that the same test. They enable the researcher to use powerful statistics in data processing. And next is norm reference, criterion reference, and domain reference test. The first is a norm reference test compares students' achievement relative to other students' achievements. A criterion reference test uh, doesn't compare student with student, but rather requires the student to fulfill a given set of criteria, a predefined and absolute standard or outcome. A criterion reference test provides the researcher with information about exactly what a student has learned, what she can do, whereas a norm reference test can only provide the researcher with information on how well one student has achieved in comparison to another, enabling ranks, orderings of performance and achievement to be constructed. Okay, the next is the domain is the particular field or area of the subject that is the being tested. For example, like in science, two parts counterpoint in music, parts of speech in English language. The domain is set out very clearly and very fully, such that the full depth and breadth of the content is established. Okay, this is the commercially and researcher produced test. For the first is there are several attractions to using published tests. They are objective, they have been piloted and refined, and the next is they have been standardized across a name. And the next is they declare how reliable and valid they are. And the next is they tend to be parametric tests, hence enabling sophisticated statistics to be calculated. And the next is they come complete with instructions for administrations. And the next is they are often straightforward and quick to administer and to mark. And the next is guided to the interpretation of the data are usually included in the manual. For the last one is researchers are spared the task of having to devise, pilot, and refine their own tests. Several commercially produced tests have restricted release or availability. Hence, the researcher might have to register with a particular association before being given clearance to use the test or before being given copies of it. The scope of test and testing is far-reaching. It is as if no areas of educational activity are untouched by them. Achievement tests, largely summative in nature, measure achieved performance in a given content area. There are 8 of constructing a test. For the first is identify the purpose, and the second is identify the test specifications, and the third is select the content, and the fourth is consider the form of the test, and the next is write the test item, and the sixth is consider the layout, and the next is consider the timing of the test, and the last is the plan of scoring tests. Okay, the first is identifying the purpose. It has its equivalent in baseline assessment and is an important feature if one is to measure the value added component of teaching and learning. One can only assess how much a set of educational experiences has added value to the student if one knows that student's starting point and starting abilities and achievement. There is 3 points in the identify the purpose. For the first is formative, and the second is diagnostic, and the last is summative. Formative testing is undertaken during a program, and the diagnostic testing is an in-depth test to discover particular strength. And the last is summative testing is the test given at the end of the program. De-identify the test specifications. De-identify the test specifications includes which program objective, which content areas will be addressed, the relative weighting, the total number of items in the test, and next the number of questions required to address a particular element of a programmer or learning outcomes. The last is the exact items in the test. Okay, the next is select the content. In moving to test construction, the researcher will need to consider how each element to be tested will be operationalized. Okay, the first is what indicators and kinds of evidence of achievement of the objective will be required. And the second is what indicators of high, moderate, and low achievement there will be. And the last is what the students will be doing when they are working on each element of the test. And the next is what the outcome of the test will be. Clearly, the selection of the form of the test item will be based on the principle of gaining the maximum amount of information in the most economical way. More recently, this is evidenced in the explosive rise of machine-scoreable multiple choice completion tests, where optical mark readers and scanners can enter and process large-scale data rapidly. Next is consider the form of the tests. Much of the discussion in this chapter assumes that the test is of the pen and paper variety. Clearly, this need not be the case. For example, tests can be written, oral, practical, interactive, computer-based, dramatic, diagrammatic, pictorial, photographic, and presentational and role-play simulations. This does not negate the issues discussed in this chapter. For the form of the test, we'll still need to consider. Indeed, several of these factors take on an added significance in non-written forms of testing. Fifth is write the test item. The test will need to address the intent and unintended clues and cues that might be provided in it. Surely, tests are issues of reliability. The following issues is that layout can exert a profound effect on the test. Is consider the layout of the test. The layout of the text should be such that it supports the completions of the test and that this is done as efficiently and as effectively as possible for the students. One is consider the timing of the test. This is referred to two areas. The first is when the test will take place, or the day of the week, month, time of day, and the second is the time allowance to be given to the tests. N is component items. Okay, and the last is plan the scoring of the test. The awarding of scores for different items of the test is a clear indication of the relative significance of each item. The weightings of each items are addressed in their scoring. It is important to ensure that easier parts of the test attract fewer marks than more difficult parts of it. Otherwise, a student's results might be artificially inflated by answering many easy questions and fewer more difficult questions. Argues that one principle in assignation of grades is that they should represent equal intervals on the score scales. References made to median scores and standard deviations. Median scores because it is meaningless to assume an absolute zero on scoring, and standard deviations as the unit of convenient size for inclusion of scores. Unit convenient size for inclusion of scores for each grade. One procedure is do step 1 is calculate the median and standard deviation of the scores, and the second step is determine the lower score limits of the mark intervals using the median and the standard deviation as the unit of size for each grade. However, the issue of cut-off scores is complicated by the fact that they may vary according to the different purposes and uses of scores.
Okay, the next material will be explained by me. The material is devising a pretest and posttest. In this point, the construction and administration of tests is an essential part of the experimental model of research, where pretest and posttest have to be devised for the control and experimental groups. The pretest and posttest must adhere to several guidelines. The first guideline is the pretest may have questions which differ in form of wording from the posttest to the two tests must test the same content. For example, they will be alternate form of a test for the same groups. And the next point is the pretest must be the same for the control and experimental groups. And the third point is the posttest must be the same for both groups. And the next is care must be taken in the construction of a posttest to avoid making the test easier to complete by one group than another. And the next point is the level of difficulty must be the same in both of tests. So in a pretest and in posttest, the level of difficulty must be the same, yeah. So this point is test data features centrally in the experimental model of research. Additionally, they may feature as part of questionnaire, interview, and documentary material. And the next is reliability and validity of tests. Yeah, what is the difference of reliability and validity of tests? In reliability, concern the degree of confidence that can be placed in the result and the data, which is often a matter of statistical calculation and subsequent test redesigning. And on the other hand, or in other words, validity concerns the extent to which the test what is supposed to test. This devolves on content, construct, phase, criterion relate, and concurrent validity. There is the difference between reliability and validity of tests. Next is ethical issue in preparing for tests. In this point, a major source of unreliability of test data derive derives from the extent and way in which students have prepared for the test. This can be located on a continuum from direct and specific preparation through indirect and general preparation to no preparation at all. Growing demand for test data, for example, for selection, for certification, for grading, for employment, for tracking, for entire to higher education, for accountability, for checking school and teacher, there is perhaps understandable pressure to prepare students for tests. This is the high stakes aspect of the testing, said Harlan 1019 and 94, where much hangs on the test result. At one level, this can be seen in the backwash effect of examination on curricula and syllabus. At another level, it can lead to the direct preparation of students for specific examination. Preparation can take many forms, said Mehrens and Kaminsky 1019 and 89 and Jeep 1019 and 94. The first form is ensuring coverage amongst other program content and objective of the objective and program that will be tested. Restricting the coverage of the program content and objective to those only that will be tested. Preparing students with exam techniques, practice with past or similar papers, directly matching the teaching to specific test items, where each piece of teaching and content is the same as each test item, and practice on an exactly parallel form of the test, telling students in advance what will appear on the test. Practice on preparation of the identical test itself without teacher input and with the teacher walking through the items, maybe providing sample answer. This is the several form to take a preparation for a test, and then one can add to the list of consideration by conducted by Crumbach and Hanna and Cunningham, the view that tests must be valid and reliable. And the next is the administration, marking, and use of the test should only be undertaken by suitable, competent, or qualified people. And access to test material should be controlled. For instance, test items should not be reproduced apart from selection in professional publication. The test should be only released to suitable qualified professionals in connection with specific professional acceptable project. The next is test should benefit the test. Clear marking and grading protocol should exist, and the test results are only reported in a way that can't be misinterpreted. And the next is the privacy and dignity of individuals should be respected, for example, confidentiality, anonymity, non-traceability. And then individuals should not be harmed by the test or its result. And the next is informed consent to participate in the test should be shown. And the next point is computerized adaptive testing. In a recent trend in testing is toward computerized adaptive testing, by Weiner 1000 and 1990. This is particularly useful for large-scale testing, where a wide range of ability can be expected. Here a test must be devised that enable the tester to cover this wide range of ability. Hence, it must include some easy to some difficult items. Too easy and it does not enable a range of high ability to be charted. Tests simply getting all the answer right. Too difficult and it doesn't enable a range of low ability to be charted. We find out very little about a test if we ask a battery of questions which are too easy or too difficult for her. Further, it is more efficient and reliable if a test can avoid the problem for high ability tests of having to work through a mass of easy items in order to reach the more difficult items, and for low ability tests of having to try to guess the answer to more difficult items. For example, if a test found an item too hard, the next item could adapt to this and be easier, and conversely, if a test was successful on an item, the next item could be hard. Clearly, the use of computer adaptive testing has several positive attractions. On the other hand, it requires different skill from traditional tests, and this might compromise the reliability of the test. For example, the mental process required to work with a computer screen and computer program differ from those required for a pen and paper test, and the motivation and anxiety level increase or decrease when tests work with computer. The physical environment might exert a significant difference. For example, lighting, glare from the screen, noise from machine, loading and running the software. Reliability shift from an index of the variability of the test to an index of the standard error of the test performance. The usual formula for calculating standard error assumes that error variance is the same for all scores, whereas in item response theory it is assumed that error variance depends on each test's ability. The conventional statistic of error variance calculates a single average variance of some scores, whereas in item response theory this is at best very crude and at worst misleading, as variation is a function of ability rather than desperation and cannot fairly be summed. And then the last is having so many test items increase the chance of inclusion of poor items. In computer adaptive testing requires a large item pool for each area of content domain to be developed, with sufficient numbers, variety, and spread of difficulty. The items have to be pre-tested and validate their difficulty and discriminability calculated. The effect of distractor reduces the capability of the test to address unidimensionality and or multidimensionality to be clarified, and the rules for selecting items to be enacted. Okay, I think enough from me. I'm sorry for any mistakes. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.